Hello. Is that working okay? Brilliant. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join your conference. It's a real honour to be here, so thank you. My name's Rob Miller. I'm Strategic Director of Customer and Workplace at Hackney Council. I'll tell you a little bit about what that is in a second. I'm going to be talking to you about a cyber attack that our council experienced in October 2020. So I've kindly asked if you please don't record the session, but I'm really keen that we're here. We can talk a little bit about that experience of being on the receiving end of a cyber attack and how we've responded to it. So I'll talk a little bit about Hackney. Hackney's at the heart of the east of London. We're a really mixed and diverse community. We've got a little over 250,000 people who live within a very small area of East London. London has 32 different local authority areas and also the City of London itself. So we're a really mixed city. We've got some really exciting kind of different life in our borough. We've got areas of extreme affluence, really wealthy areas, right next door to and side by side with people living in significant poverty. So we've got a really diverse borough. We've got a very vibrant local economy. We've got a lot of independent businesses. We've got very large companies. Amazon have one of their headquarters at the south of the borough. And we also have a thriving tech sector in Hackney. So I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about the context of technology in local authorities. So a local council in the UK, we're responsible for a huge range of different government services in our area. We pay benefits, we keep the streets clean, we maintain the parks, we provide social housing, we do a huge range of different services. In the late 1990s and 2000, there was a huge investment in technology in British public service. So we had a lot of money coming in, a lot of new innovation, and a lot of technology. But we haven't sustained that across the UK. We've had 15 years where we've been experiencing significant budget reductions through austerity. And we're still running, in many ways, technology which is of 20 years ago. We've maintained it, we've kept it running, but we're operating in a technology which is made for a very different world to the modern internet world we're in now. So over the time since we had our huge investments in government technology, the world has changed. You know, back then we didn't have the cloud, mobile devices were a very different thing to what they are now, and our systems have often struggled to keep up. So where we're maintaining our technology, we're trying to do so in a world which is really different. So our users have very different expectations. Using Instagram is very different to running the types of computing system you'd be using running a council business, even when actually the things you're trying to do, technology like Instagram, would be really helpful. There's a lot of difficulty with integrating systems, but it also presents some significant security challenges for us. So in Hackney Council, we've been leading, along with other local authorities in the UK, work to try and change that. And this is something we've been working really hard at for 5, 6 or 7 years. So we've sustained our investment in our technology. We've continued investment in security. Importantly, we've migrated to a lot of our services into the cloud, and that was an ongoing piece of work before our attack. And we've also been working to build our own software where the market isn't meeting our expectations, where there's market failure. So a lot of investment, a lot of transformation within technology at Hackney. But it's really difficult. So I'm sure working in your organisations as well, you'll know that it's very hard replacing systems which are business critical, which are operating throughout really complicated organisations, when you know you need to move on to modern technology, but the job of doing that is extremely challenging. And within a local government context, we operate maybe 500 different services. Each of those services will use different systems, have different data. So having the idea is very easy compared to the work of making that idea happen. There's lots of barriers to change. So we have both the complexities of our own organisations, but we also have difficulties around the software market. So in many of our service areas, there might be 3, maybe 4 software companies operating in those sectors. So you have very limited choice. Some of those markets are not dynamic. We need to link in with lots of different partners. So we can change our technology, but unless our colleagues in the health system or in other parts of government or other partners we work with are also modernising their technology, sometimes it can be quite hard and we have to go slower than we would like to. And at the same time, as with everybody, we've been operating in to recover from the effects of the pandemic. There's other huge changes which we need to respond to. So we're in a very complicated environment, which makes it very hard to move at the pace that we would like to. Fortunately, before the attack happened to Hackney Council, we'd already made some significant changes. So when I've spoken with other organisations who've suffered cyber attacks like we did, they've literally been in their office, they've had to get paper out and pens, they've not had any data, they've had no systems, they've not been able to communicate with one another, they've been back to an age before computing. For us in Hackney, because of the moves we'd already made, we were in a different position. So whilst when I speak to my colleagues and say to them it could have been worse, and they look at me and they say, how could it have been worse? The attack was really hard, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It could have been hard, could have been much worse. We could still communicate. Our email systems were unaffected. Most of our computers still work because they ran Chrome OS, not Windows. We had our phone system was a cloud service which didn't have any reliance on our own servers. There were a huge number of things we could do which actually other organisations haven't been able to do. Our finance system was unaffected because that was also a cloud service. Our HR and people data was unaffected. So for us, we were in a strange world where some of the things that we needed to carry on our organisation were unaffected, but many of the things we needed to deliver our services were completely unavailable to us. But we'd also invested in our skills. So we had a digital team who we were able to change the work they were doing from the first day after the attack, and instead of working on the projects they were working on, we could deploy those people to help the organisation carry on our services. So just a few examples. I mean, these are mostly from a UK perspective, but there's also global examples there. But the effect of cybercrime on the world has just become astonishing. The time when we were hit, it was rapidly increasing. That increase has gone up even higher. And Alexis and I were talking earlier, these aren't just small organisations or people's own private computers being affected. These are big global organisations. And again, looking at critical national infrastructure, Colonial Pipeline in the US is a really extreme example of how you can have really significant social impact from cybercrime. Something which has become really obvious is the scale that cybercriminals are operating at. We're not just looking at teenagers in hoodies at their desks being devious and trying things out. We're operating against global scale multinational organisations, which even a large organisation, our council will have £1 billion move through our bank accounts each year. So we're not small, but compared to some of these organisations, we're at a very different scale. I just hadn't appreciated when someone told me that they operate call centres to speak to their customers. So it dawned on me just quite how serious they are. But there's a huge amount of literature now talking about the scale of this. And the attack on us was devastating. So it happened on a Sunday in October 2020. At the end of the day, I didn't know we could recover any of the affected data, and we weren't able to tell our service managers, give them any indication of how long it would take to recover their systems. So at that point in time, we're responsible for a huge range of government services to 250,000 people, and we've lost most of our systems, and we don't yet know what we can do. It was a very, very bleak day. Often when we're talking about this and when we're doing our exercises, we're looking at the emergency stage. Systems are down, cyber attacks happened, what are you going to do? I think the thing which I'd really highlight is actually the recovery work, bringing systems back, bringing data back, is vastly longer than that. So we're now 2.5 years since the attack. Many of our services are back to normal. Some services are still suffering the effects of it. And recovering the systems is only part of the work. Once you've got the system back, you then need to get all your data up and running. You need to carry on all the backlogs of work that people haven't been able to do because they haven't got their computer system, and that can take a very long time. So, for example, our local authority, our council, administers housing benefits. So we make state benefit payments to help people with their housing costs for about 30,000 households. The system that they use, we brought that back about April 2021, so it took about 6 months to get their system back. It took them about another 1.5 years before we could say that people would experience a normal service from the council. So really need to underline, if you're in the unfortunate position of suffering these attacks, in that first moment, prepare yourself for the very long haul. And for us, it was really important that we paced ourselves and we knew that we were running a marathon. We weren't running a 100-meter sprint. We've worked really closely with partners. So again, we've got a digital team of about 120 people, but we knew we needed skills, we needed capacity that we didn't have in-house. So we work very closely with central government agencies. So I'm sure you'll have heard of the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, who are the leads for cybersecurity in the UK. We worked very closely with them. Because it was a criminal attack, our National Crime Agency have been very closely involved as well. And we've also coordinated with central government. So our public services have a lot of connections in. We work with the Ministry of Justice when we have people who have been through the criminal justice system who need our support. We work with the health service because our local social care services are really important. For example, when someone has been in hospital, often they will need our social care services to help them come back to their home and live a healthy and productive lives. So we work really closely with central government, and that coordination was really important. We used a company called BAE Systems, who brought in cyber experts to help us with the forensics. And we also work with our other local authorities. My first career was in the commercial sector, working in retail. One of the things I love about working in public services is we're not in competition with one another. So neighbouring councils doing similar things also helped us out. So we had other councils give us technical expertise, or with their experience of moving some of the systems that we needed to move into the cloud, they were able to help us do that more quickly. So it was not just a Hackney Council effort. We were part of a bigger group of organisations helping with the recovery. I said earlier, a local authority delivers so many different services, so the impacts on our residents were huge. People rely on us for money. People apply to us for social housing. Simple things like property transactions, people who wanted to buy and sell properties, the local authority does a part of the legal process for that. So we were finding in the first days, people actually couldn't sell their homes or couldn't buy a home because we couldn't provide the data to do our bit of that transaction. We had to operate we manage about 30,000 social homes. We do repairs for those homes. If there's a leak, if there's a gas maintenance needed, it's our teams who do that. And we had to run those off temporary tools for an extended period of time. And also critical services like social care were affected. So the impact on our residents is really significant. And again, I think when we're talking about cybercrime, many of us, and I'm sure all of you have been taking this very seriously for a very long time, but it's when you see those human impacts that you really understand how important it is. I said earlier about needing to pace ourselves. The impacts on our staff have been really significant. Many people in council services who really want to do the best thing for our residents haven't been able to do what they know they need to do because their computer system hasn't been available. So those people have had to spend a huge amount of time working in unusual ways to try and do our best. They've had to apologise endlessly to residents for things that we've not been able to do. While we were doing that work, we had to make sure that we were holding that data in a way that would allow us to bring things back to normal when our systems were available again. So we had to be very organised about our business continuity so that we could move to a normal situation more quickly when our systems were back. And like I said earlier, the backlogs of work are as much of an exercise as actually recovering the computer systems. So the impacts on the council have been really significant. I've been very lucky. We have elected politicians who are responsible for our council. All of those elected politicians and all of my colleagues within the council were single-minded in our focus on our residents. So I've spoken to other organisations who've been victims of similar attacks where infighting and difficulties within the organisation have been a huge delay and have made the recovery work harder. I've been very fortunate that our organisation was really focused on our residents and didn't fall into that trap. The financial impacts are really significant as well. So again, I think if we're talking about what goes wrong if there's a cyber attack, first thing that comes to mind is the cost of rebuilding those computer systems, the technical teams you need. But on top of that, We've also needed significant extra capacity. So even though we've got a reason, for a UK council, we've got quite a large digital team, we've had to bring in extra expertise. We've also had to bring in additional staff to process those backlogs of work so that we don't have as long an impact as we otherwise would. And we've also lost income. So we collect council tax, we collect rents. So an important part of the money we have to deliver our services is money we collect. And without our normal systems, that's been much, much harder at the same time as the financial impact of the pandemic has also hit our income collection. And lest we forget, there's a lot we need to do. So, we're operating in a challenging world. There's a huge amount of change that we need to deliver. We've been focusing on recovering our organisation and not doing some of the work that we wanted to do. So there's opportunity costs as well. So when you're looking at the technical costs of a cyber attack, really the technical costs are the tip of the iceberg. The real costs are much larger than that. Talking to people and keeping them up to date has also been really, really challenging. So we're really committed to being as transparent as we can. Many people who've been victims of a cyber attack hide and don't want to talk to anybody. I think we're unusual in wanting to come to events like this, and again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk with you. We want to help the wider community. We want to help people learn from our lessons. We want to make sure that we're talking to our residents. So our residents need to trust that their council is on their side. We can't do that if we're not talking with them. But there's lots of reasons why it's really hard to talk openly and as open as we want. Firstly, because there's a lot of uncertainty. Like I said, that the first weeks of the attack, if someone could ask me, when will we be recovered? All I could say was it will be at least months, if not years. I couldn't give them any certainty around that. And at the same time, when some parts of the council seem to be okay, because their technology is already in the cloud, already operating on a modern security paradigm, people think, well, why is that working? But that's not. So it's a really challenging message to explain to people. Keeping people up to date is complicated. So again, like I said, with our benefits processing, I could say in April 2021, fantastic news, we've recovered the system, but it was still a year and a half before the service felt like normal. So some of those updates, despite being huge achievements, are only one step of the journey. So explaining that to people in a way that's simple, that they understand and they trust is really difficult. The other thing that's hard is normally in a disaster, the disaster has happened and then you're recovering from it. So if there was a flood, if there was extreme weather, if there was a building had caught fire, the event would have happened and we would now be fixing it. In our case, the people who attacked us are still there. If they could do further bad things to us, they still will. Anything we share in the public domain which might be helpful for them, and we don't know what might be helpful for them, they will then use. So we're not just talking to our residents, we're also being watched, and that's still the case. So our attackers have not been caught. I doubt they will be. So there's a permanent risk and a threat around that. We've had to be able to, I talked earlier about local politicians, so our politicians are the most visible part of the council to our residents. They're out there, they're knocking on doors, they're talking to the residents who vote for them. I need to explain complicated technical matters to them in a way that they can explain to their residents. So there's a translation challenge of taking really difficult conversations around cloud, zero trust security, patching, the difference between systems like Chrome and iOS and Android versus more traditional Windows systems, flat networks, all this stuff which doesn't mean anything to most of our residents, and our elected members, most of them are not of that world either. We've also had a huge amount of media interest. So I was, again, saying earlier, I was interviewed by Wired magazine only this year, and that's 2 years since the attack, but the media have continued to be interested, so we've had to make sure we're engaging with that as well, and again, making sure that we're seen to be transparent, not look like we're hiding. And the UK Information Commissioner, who's responsible, who is the organisation within the UK who take responsibility for data rights, they are also still investigating the attack. So we're now 2.5 years in and we've yet to find out their conclusions. So again, that's something which, when we're explaining to a resident who wants to know, well, what happened? Who was accountable? We can't tell you because all of those different investigations are still running. So while the first thing on my mind on the 11th of October 2020 was a technical challenge, very soon after was a business continuity challenge. Actually, how do we manage the communications and how do we speak authoritatively and in a trustworthy way was every bit as challenging. So a few final sort of thoughts just to wrap up my presentation and things which I've been sharing with colleagues in my sector in the UK, but I think they apply more widely. So the first thing is the people who are trying to attack us, trying to attack you, trying to attack everybody who is running our legitimate businesses, running public services, supporting societies across the world, they are extraordinarily highly motivated and they are extraordinarily well-resourced. Are we up to the challenge? I think sometimes we're bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. We really need to think about how we meet that challenge. So earlier things around the cyber work that's taking place in Oman, I think is a really good example of where giving that work, that prominence is really important. The next thing is, whilst we shouldn't accept that there will be attacks, the reality is there will be. So while we must do everything we can to protect our systems and to try and move to the most secure and resilient platforms possible, at the same time we also need to be planning for what happens if it goes wrong. So again, 33 councils in London, Hackney was hit in 2020. When will the next one be hit? And how will we collectively support them and learn from what Hackney has experienced? And the same applies in other sectors as well. The third thought is, whilst none of these modern technologies are magically secure. So cloud does not mean impossible to attack. There's many ways in which cloud can be compromised in the same way as more traditional systems. At the same time, there are some things that we can be doing and we must be doing which fundamentally reduce the risk. It's very hard with our older systems, but it being hard isn't an excuse for not doing it. So again, like I said earlier, because we had moved our communication systems to the cloud, because our website was in the cloud, and importantly, because we'd implemented that in a model which didn't create dependencies between systems where they didn't need to exist, didn't create dependencies between our legacy on-premise systems and the cloud, those were unaffected. It's perfectly possible to implement Google Workspace or Office 365 and link it back to your on-premise Active Directory. If your on-premise Active Directory is hit, you don't have your Office 365 either. So it's really important that we're pushing ourselves to implement the most resilient paradigms we can, because if we're attacked, we will depend on those. And then finally, and this, I'm not sufficiently expert in your context, but for us, for example, like I said, in London, there are 33 councils. If you assume that collectively about 25 billion sterling across those councils, a 25 billion pound organisation would have a very different cyber resilience capacity to a 1 billion pound organisation. So the question we're looking at hard in London is, what can we do at a London scale that we might not currently be doing at a local authority scale? So I'll leave those questions with you and wish you all the very best with the conference, but also your work to protect Oman against these attacks. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come here and share our learnings together. So thank you very, very much. Thank you.